to another episode of Discussions of Exploration with your host, Sabrina Ben Salmi. Today, I'm joined with a very special guest, Professor Dr. Ger Graus. He is the Global Director of Education at KidZania. It is an absolute honor for you to join me in this space. Please say hi to our listeners and just introduce yourself so they know a bit about you.
Hello, I'm Ger Graus. As was just mentioned, I'm the Global Education Director for KidZania. I'm a dad of 3. One is being taught upstairs at the moment via online whatever. And I've been in education kind of all my life, really. Went to school as a child and came back and went to big school and became a teacher and kind of moved on and now sit in that space about learning and education, but outside school. And I think in the current climate, when we get back to whatever normal looks like, and however temporary normal might be, the space about learning in museums, libraries, galleries, learning out of school, I think is going to be a bit of a struggle. So I'm looking forward to making the most of that, really. So that's me.
Thank you so much for that introduction. You know, one of the things that really caught my eye was your signature talk around children can only aspire to what they know exists. That really excited me. It really excited me in so many ways, because life is pretty much a buffet, but if you don't know what's on the buffet, how can you choose? So I wonder if you can take our listeners down that path. I think it's absolutely amazing.
I think there are two parallel paths that run here, and I think sadly they very rarely cross. So if we just take in the UK, but you could go to many other countries. If you take the government and its attempts to reopen schools, for example, in England, let's focus on that. It's its reaction to the school closures and children being taught from home. That's one pathway that is really quite simply disconnected from the reality. So for example, giving children from disadvantaged background 20,000 or 200,000 or whatever it is laptops is pretty meaningless if you hadn't realized that those youngsters haven't got internet access at home. Right. So there are, on this pathway, there's no doubt there are real intentions, really good intentions, but they're divorced from reality. And the children can only aspire to what they know exists, and as I said, is the parallel bit. And where it comes from is very simple. Many years ago, feels like many years ago, I was the education director of what were known as education action zones. This was under the Tony Blair government. And education action zones was a project that was targeted at areas of significant deprivation. So there were about 25 to start with in England. And effectively what it was to try and do things differently and also involve the private sector. And in my case, my 2 education action zones were in Wythenshawe, South Manchester, next to Manchester Airport. And you had this really odd thing that you had Manchester Airport as one of the fastest growing companies outside London, sitting absolutely next to one of the most deprived and one of the largest council estates in Europe. So the airport became the co-sponsor, and their agenda essentially was to develop skills in young people and adults in the community so that they became better employable, whatever that looked like 15, 20 years ago. And one of the things I started doing was I started to talk we had 19 primary schools, I think, at the time. I started to talk to lots of children and ask them the jobs they could do at the airport. And the answer you got is what they could see. Yeah? Which is only about 35% of the jobs, because you don't immediately see that there is a doctor at the airport and that there's a priest at the airport and all sorts of other things, right? So in a sense, about 65 or 60% of the jobs were not known to the children, and therefore they couldn't aspire to them in the first place. Then I used to say to the kids, look, if you look up, you can fly airplanes, right? And the answer I then got from 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds was, people from here don't fly planes. So the ceiling of aspiration was already placed upon those children, not by the kids themselves, but actually by the people around them. So the expectations you have of an area, and that kind of stayed with me. And then wherever you go, you discover that children can only aspire to what they know exists, but you also discover quite quickly that adults can only aspire to what they know exists, and quite often on behalf of their children. So that aspiration side of education then becomes a very important piece, because it's also about purpose. And then you also understand that that cannot necessarily be achieved in school and in lessons. So you need to begin to distinguish between schooling, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 9 to 5, being taught, and education, the bit that sits outside there, but that connects. The kind of theory into practice, the awe and wonder that brings in. And that's where it came from. And through then later on, through Children's University, and now through KidZania and all the other things, that, you know, in life, certain things stay with you. And that's one of them. So in a long-winded way, that's the answer, I suppose.
That's not long-winded at all. That's actually very heartfelt. Listeners and viewers, I really would love you to leave a comment to let us know if that moved you as much as it moved me, because I felt crushed when you said that you can fly a plane, and the child said, people from here don't do that.
But I think on top of that, there's something else, and because at the moment, of course, we live in a world of statistics daily. We're getting statistics, and we have to be ever so careful for a number of reasons with statistics. But when we talk about statistics about children and deprivation, we have to be very mindful that what we present is often one-dimensional. Right? So you're either a girl or a boy, or you're poor or you're not poor, or you're black or you're not black, or you're rural or you're urban. But at some point, we need to kind of make this multidimensional and say, so actually, if you're a girl and you're black and you're poor and you live in an urban environment, the chances are not just stacked against you once, but 4 or 5 times. And that's also a reality factor, I think, that often escapes us, because the way that government in particular analyzes statistics means you go in that box and then you go in that box and then you go in that one. But from the individual's point of view, it doesn't really matter which box you go into. When the odds are so stacked against you, you need more. And I think we need to go back to the bit where we place the child in the middle, the individual, and say, now collectively, what do we need to do? Rather than, this is the answer, follow this. Because it doesn't work.
You're making this so hard for me to speak, because inside I'm just I'm so excited. You know, what you're touching on is very near and dear to my heart. And as a parent, I have 5 children. That's exactly what inspired me. The first thing that I heard when I gave birth to my son, who's the second eldest, is that he's a black boy. He will not be able to. And I was like, what? He would not be able to. So I had to, at those times, KidZania wasn't there just as yet. So when KidZania came, it was amazing. And listeners and viewers, KidZania for me is all about the experiential learning, emotional intelligence. There's so many skills that they learn from the interaction, because immersive learning teaches your children beyond words, okay? So the terror that I felt is that my son's just born, and people were warning me that he would not be able to X because he was a black boy from East London. And that, for me as a mother, being a new mother, it was only my second born. And I was frozen from the inside out. I was paralyzed. I think that's the better way to describe it. And I love what you said, is that what's needed. So I started to question, what are the key components that my children need to be immersed in order to prepare them for life? So how can we somewhat future-proof our children? How can we install what they need with the correct support systems? And as a result, just to cut a long story short, they've grown up, they speak on stage, they've published books, they've launched their own publishing houses. So they've literally just obliterated that belief system of, I can't because of. Now, I was raised in a single parent background. I was a single mum. I didn't have family. So I was everything that ticked the box of you can't be. I also had learning difficulties. I was diagnosed with dyslexia. But I love what you're saying, Professor, because it's like, what does that individual leave? And like, talking to you absolutely excites me. What's your vision going forward for schooling? What can you see is a way that we can move forward? Because I love your mindset around how can we actually house children so they can aspire to more.
I think it's an interesting one. I keep hearing the new normal, and my new series with Pearson is the webinars is entitled The New Normal. I wanted to call it It Is What It Is, and we are where we are. It's interesting. You see, I think there isn't much wrong with schooling. I think most of schooling is right. And I think one of the things, if you look, the things that schools have fulfilled in the last couple of weeks, there is that thing, if you follow football, then Barcelona Football Club has this motto, Més que un club, more than a club. And I think what we've seen in good schools, and I would say particularly primary schools, because they're closer to communities quite often, is that kind of more than a school thing. That, you know, the food parcels that are ready in the school in Sheffield that I've got in mind, where the parents can come and pick up those food parcels, how the community focuses around that school, all of that is amazing, right? And those schools work extraordinarily hard to do the right thing by their children, and they know their children and they know their families. Now, they need more, not just more money, but they need support, and they need trust. They need professional trust, right? So there's nonsense of, you know, the bit that we're going to see quite soon is, on the one hand, the unions doing this bit, and on the other hand, you've got a government, quite frankly, that is so far removed from that reality that it's embarrassing. Right? Don't let those schools get on with it. Tell them what you want to happen, and then go, you know what you're doing, right? And we need to, and I hope that the parents who've been at home with their children and have seen that it's actually not that easy to teach one kid, two kids, let alone 20 or whatever, that there's some respect that comes back to this, and that gives that respect to those teachers, and that government might want to change its mind. I think that's incredibly important. So schooling, what needs to change about schooling, quite frankly, is society's and politics' attitudes towards the respect they have for teachers. That's the first thing that needs to change. And that doesn't mean that you're not accountable, and that doesn't mean that everybody's brilliant and all that bit. It's just what that profession and what those people merit. And then, of course, we need to think around some of the online lessons that may have worked really well. What can we learn from that? Can we continue this? But there's a big word of warning in this, and this is that I do some work with the Education Council at BET. They organise massive conferences all over the world. And in that group, one of the things that we've concluded is that internet access for children needs to be a utility and an entitlement, just like free school meals and water, right? Because otherwise what we will have very quickly is have and have not, and can and cannot. So we need to bring education, and thereby schooling, back to focus on the individual child rather than on the mass production that through industrial revolutions etc. Education, or schooling rather, has turned into. And we need to work more closely with other agencies so that the school is the hub. But when it comes to careers education, as an example, don't let the teachers do careers education. They don't know that much about it, and that's okay. But they're brilliant project managers to bring in people from all over the place to come and talk to the kids, to go on work experience, to go to museums, to libraries, to galleries. We need to create a list of out-of-school entitlements that children should have. So schooling actually needs to become more important, more crucial, and more innovative, and more child-focused. And that has to be done through professional trust.
Wow. Listeners and viewers, that was such a fruitful answer. Professor, thank you so much. So I met Professor at the BET conference and I was blown away. So I didn't meet you, but I came across you first time there and I was blown away. Number one, the kids and I, because I homeschool the kids now, and the kids and I said, we want to be a part of that, because I love the way you engross. I love the entitlement. I love the fact that you've touched on the essence that we're going to create a world that of the haves and the haves not, and it's going to be so vast, not what we're seeing now. It's going to be so painful. And I love that you said that access and utilities should be like a basic need, like food and shelter and water. I think that is going to be a game changer in so many respects. One of the things that I really love, and I want to highlight to the listeners and the viewers, is the fact of the respect that we need to have for the staff, the trust that we need to have, because I've heard parents screaming out that it's hard for them to manage their own. But what about a class of 30? What about those teachers that are putting in the work, that we're having so much disparity? And you touched on something that's so important for me, is that connection. They have connections with the families, they have relationships. And for me, in our family, we teach not to chase money, but to build relationships, because the relationships are the most precious commodity that we're not really tapping into. And I think that's an essence of emotional intelligence. So thank you so much for your, was there something else you had?
Yeah, I think there's something to be added to this, and this is that you can build, this should be built up from the bottom up, but at the same time it should have recognition from the top down. So my challenge, for example, to Ofsted would be, you need to redefine what you mean by a good school. It is not just an examinations factory. If all of those brilliant things that have just gone on and are still going on now, if you really think that they are brilliant, then you need to rewrite the book.
Wow, that is powerful. Redefine what a good school is. I love that. That is so amazing. Listeners and viewers, start thinking about your schools. Start thinking about how you can support them, because after all, that's where your children spends most of their life, okay? They are here to impact our children's lives in ways that we go on to remember. You know, I remember my interaction at primary school, and we've got to think about what are those subtle imprints that are going to be in our children's life for the rest of their lives. So how can we contribute? Professor, what's some of your concerns around if we don't take heed, if we don't support, if they don't rewrite the book, so to speak? What are some of the concerns that come up for you? What's percolating in your mind?
I think if we take the world as it is, and some of it is, and I don't just mean now the coronavirus, but I think the general state of affairs, some of it is not very pleasant and it is not very kind. And the leadership in a number of countries is not leadership, what I would say is leadership by example. And I think what we've perhaps seen more clearly in the last couple of years is that things actually aren't as good as we'd assumed they were. Yeah? And whether we assumed they were because political correctness got in the way, as somebody needs to do that analysis who is expert in this. But what's quite clear to me is that elements of racism, for example, have come to the fore very clearly since Brexit. I don't think they've just appeared. I think that's probably always been there, but this event allowed this to rise to the surface. I think the same is undoubtedly true if you look at the state of affairs in the United States of America, which it doesn't take a decent human being to conclude very quickly that the president of the United States doesn't come across as the kindest man on earth, and it's replicated in other countries, right? So, and then you look now at the situation in England as an example around the coronavirus and internet access and those kind of things, and actually we're not as equal as we thought we were either. So I think we need to take good stock and honest stock and kind of say, look, you know, we've been patting ourselves on the back for a good number of years, and we've been buying outstanding banners and putting them outside all sorts of places. We're not that brilliant. And I think otherwise what we will do is we will build our society on a fake foundation. And that's a dangerous thing to do. And I do believe that we require leadership that is transparent and honest, and that will be painful. But if we don't do that, I'm not sure what we are doing for our children as the next generation. I think we've been pretty good at screwing things for them up anyway, in environmental terms and in all sorts of other ways. Surely what we owe them is to now sit down and go, actually, we've made a bit of a mess of that, and we haven't been honest about this. And it depresses me intensely when I watch television and I see that people just can stand there and openly lie, and that's okay. So I think before we do anything, that's stock take. And hopefully, because every cloud has a silver lining, and there have been many silver linings that we've been able to see through this crisis. And I hope that the clapping on a Thursday night, for example, will turn into a long-lasting respect, and that the NHS will never be threatened again. So there are silver linings, but we need to take stock. We need to take stock of what we're doing with our kids and what we're doing with our society and what we stand for.
Excellent, excellent, excellent response. Listeners and viewers, I love the essence of Professor actually calling upon us to question, what are we giving our children in terms of inheritance for the next generation? That is so deeply profound. And I don't think we're actually asking ourselves those questions, because I think it's the power of the questions that we ask ourselves causes us to show up in a better light. And one thing that you mentioned when I asked you the other question that I really want to touch back on is that we need to regain trust. I love the fact that you said schools are not bad. And I think it's people so quick to jump. Like, I had to homeschool my children, but it was a personal journey. Homeschooling is not for every family. You're at home, you know how hard it is. It was a personal choice that I had to make for us, for our family circumstances. But I don't not believe in education. My children, as well, all 5 of them go to Brunel University for academics. So they've already passed certifications in engineering, masterclasses. They're doing computer science there. So they're still very much involved in education. We're just doing it slightly differently. So I think it's so important that you said that. And I just wanted to highlight that, is that the trust. People think that homeschooling is about disconnecting and not wanting. No, it's about immersing in ways that can help you so much more, because schools need your support. They need you to be there. They need that. So sorry, I just felt that I had to just touch on that, because I think it's so important that people understand we do need to rebuild trust, just like any relationship. Rebuild trust.
And I think we need to think about, to your point, we need to think about parents as co-educators rather than. I've come across some quite strange stories in the last couple of weeks internationally about parents who can afford to send their children to independent schools, and who now, because the schools are teaching their children remotely, so to speak, who are now kind of doing that stuff that says, well, I'm now not paying the fees, or I want to pay less. And where people begin to treat their child's education as a financial commodity, it is very odd that happens. And I think, so we have to begin to think and also talk again about the parent as the responsible co-educator. You can't just say, right, your responsibility. And I think schools need to be kind of brave. And when it comes to, I don't know, I've used this as an example in the past. When it comes to sex education, for example, I don't think schools should do that. I think they can do the biology bits of it, but I think responsibility. So I think that debate around co-ownership needs revisiting responsibly.
I love that. Firstly, responsibility, but I love co-educating. I love that essence of parents being involved, and this actually hits the nail on the head for our personal journey. From day dot, when my children were inserted into the educational system, I didn't just drop them at the gate and say, here you go, that's it, you get educated. It was two-way. When they came home, we did things. Monday to Friday, you're at school. Evening, weekends, we're tapping into emotional intelligence, personal development, awareness. So I love that. That really excites me for the future, because listeners and viewers, if there's anything you can take away from that, really question the way you actually perceived education. Are you just taking your kids to school and expecting the school to do it all? Or are you working together? Because I've had some talks in the background as well. And I know it's very much the latter, where people think, well, actually, they're supposed to do it at school. It all happens there. Well, actually, no, it's two-way. And that's going to actually see the better placement in your child's life, because then there's cohesiveness, there's understanding, there's cooperation. And as you understand, we can go far alone, but we can go so much further together. Really, really, really love what you're talking about. Professor, I wonder if we can get some information about any up and coming programs that you've got that listeners and viewers can tap into and for the future, just so they can get more of your mindset.
Well, it's been a strange world. Normally I spend a considerable amount of time of my life on aeroplanes and at big conferences. And of course, I think the last big conference I was at was Guest Dubai at the end of February. And to a degree, this has been replaced now by webinars and online events. Although I'm very pleased to say that you know, all being well, then by the end of November time, I shall be traveling again, because there's nothing quite like it. And I as a boy, I used to have an atlas. I wish I could find that atlas. And I used to mark all the places that I wanted to travel to. And I'd quite like to compare the two now if I ever find the atlas. So I'm very fortunate. I have done a number of webinars, and I'm going to do a few more. One soon to be announced, or there will be a number in Australia, but also one globally with a partnership with Pearson, where we're starting with 6, starting on the 19th of May for 6 consecutive weeks, and then we're going to do another 6 in the autumn. And I'm just interviewing some friends and acquaintances who happen to be connected either directly or indirectly with the education world. And it's going to be unlike the current TV interviews, where they all seem to be aggressive and everything's got to be somebody's fault. We're just going to have a chat and try and find out whether we can come up with some answers. So if you could put any links to that in the information, then I would be very grateful. I think, yeah, it's called the new normal, but as I said earlier, I wanted to call it, it is what it is. And it's good fun, you know. So from Dr. Abdullah Al-Karam, who is the chairman of effectively the Education Authority in Dubai, to Kate Anquetil, who's a futurist, to the founder of KidZania, to the managing director of the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, to school principals, you name it, they all turn up. So it'll be good fun. And that's the main one. And then I'm going to take hopefully a little bit of a summer holiday. And then I hope to be traveling again in the autumn. Who knows?
Oh, I can't wait to get you back up in the sky. I love the connection to your childhood. It'd be amazing if you could get hold of that to find out where you've been. I love that, because when we grew up with 80 people around the world, good fun. But that sounds really exciting. So listeners and viewers, I will be putting a link in the description so you can actually link to that. Professor, I wonder if you can leave a departing message to our listeners and viewers.
Yeah, keep smiling. Yeah, because there's a lot of talk about the new normal and this and change forever. But when it's what is it now, 25 to 1 in the afternoon, when I finish here in a minute and I go upstairs to tell my daughter that I finished and we can have lunch, she'll still smile, she'll still be amazing. Look for the good. Don't be too scared by the scaremongers, and be brave, and just love your kids.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful message. And listeners and viewers, please take heed. Gratitude is a perfect place, and smiling definitely is the best medicine. And connect, you know, cherish every day, because the truth is, before this came up, we never had no certification telling us that we was lasting until Friday. So we just have to learn to cherish life no matter what's going on. Professor, it has been an absolute honor to be in this space with you. I thank you for sharing with us.
My pleasure.
It's really been an honor. And if you could leave a website, is there any websites that I can put it in the link, but if you can just verbalize if there's a website that people can reach out to you on?
My LinkedIn profile is not bad. I tell stories of where I go and what I've done. the Pearson website in terms of the webinars coming up, the KidZania website always in terms of building cities for children. And that's about it, I think.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to let you get back to your precious daughter. Have a wonderful afternoon, Professor, and thank you. Listeners, thank you so much.
And you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye-bye now.